Alright, we're going to start out by opening up our DGN file. And before we can open up our DGN file, we need to set up our user project and interface. And so you can either go with the delivered, which is setting your user to examples, setting your project to Bentley Civil Imperial, setting your interface to Bentley Civil. And then you can go to your data set, which I have on my desktop currently. It could also be in the Bentley training folder on the C drive. And you'd open up pad and parking DGN. The other way to set up your user project and interface, we've noticed that some changes have been made sometimes to this project, or some users don't have this, so we also delivered the civil training workspace. And so if you extracted that down to the C drive Bentley training folder, I can go ahead and create a new user called civil training. So hit the drop down on the user and hit new. So this is just an alternative user project and interface here. So I'd create a new user and call it civil training. Hit OK. And then I have to point to my project and interface. So for the project, you hit the select button and you would point to, here on my C drive, I've got a civil training workspace folder that I've extracted that was in an email. And I can go ahead and go to my project, Bentley Civil Imperial Training PCF, and select that because I'm going to be running Imperial. Select that and hit open. And then select your user interface. Mine's already selected, but you can hit that select button there and make sure you select Bentley Civil and hit OK. And hit OK on this workspace creation. So now I've got a user, project, and interface set up. Then I could go back and open up my DGN file, pad and parking DGN. So one of those two configurations of user, project, and interface that I've just mentioned, make sure you set that first. That's the key to our standards. And then once I have that, I can open up pad and parking, select that DGN file, and click open. And what we should see in this DGN should open up to where we can see our lot and pad. And there's also a 3D model displayed as well in a separate view. Jump into the vertical geometry tools. So all the horizontal is already created. So I'm going to go underneath my vertical geometry and select profile from surface. Now it asks us to locate the first element, set up our tools first, and then identify everything graphically. So I want to make sure my profile from surface, we have our point selection set to all, our profile adjustment set to maximum, draping option is triangles, horizontal offset is 0, vertical offset is 2, the range should be the entire length, so we have locked it to the start, locked it to the end. We're going to give it a name of pad profile, and we're going to use linear site pad for the element template. If your element template is set to none, it'll just take whatever the feature definition was on the horizontal geometry. I'm using this just so that I can make sure that it appears in my profile view a certain way. So we want to locate our pad, left click on that, and then next we're going to locate the element, keep locating elements to profile. We're just going to do the pad, so that's selected. Go ahead and right click and locate your reference surface. Now your existing ground should be set active. So if I right click, it takes that existing terrain as my active, and then I'm going to left click for the start, left click for the end, because I've locked to the start and end. Point selection is set to all, profile adjustment maximum, triangles for my draping option, horizontal offset, vertical offset. Just left click through my settings and it creates a profile. Now we need to make sure that our profile is created, and we need to set it active and double check the name and the display and all of that. So I'm going to open up a profile model real quick and just go back to my element selection tool. So exit out of the command that I was in, and then click on your element for your building. Hover over that and go to the open profile model and place that in view number 2. So I'm going to click in view 2, left click to put the profile there. Now you can click on your profile and observe the properties of that. You can hover over it, click on properties, and you would notice that there is a vertical offset. It's using a maximum, so it takes the highest elevation of the terrain along this building pad, takes the highest point, and then adds 2 feet. Now we can even change that information. You can change it on the properties, or you can go over here to element information, and you can even change it here as well. So if we change the vertical offset to 0, you can see how it drops it down to where it's now at the highest point on the surface. You change it back. You can do an edit undo or type in a vertical offset of 2 again, and it changes the vertical offset. We also want to make sure we set this active. So click on your pad, highlight it, hover over it, and set it as the active profile. Now as soon as we do that, if we close view 2, as soon as you set the vertical geometry active, it creates a 3D element. So you create the horizontal, create the vertical, and set it active. Now we have a 3D element displayed in this 3D view down here. And so I can see the pad in 3D. I can also see it here in 2D. The next thing we're going to do is create the profile for the yard. So in our vertical geometry tools, we have a command here, profile by slope from element. Click on that. And again, we can put some of our settings in the dialog box, or we can just put the settings in as we go with the graphic display. So I'm going to go ahead and try it with my graphic display, other than the feature name and element template here. We're going to use yard profile for the name and linear site yard for the element template. And everything else up top here is going to give me a prompt. So left click on your yard, and then right click, because that's the only element we want to profile, and then locate your reference element. The reference element is going to be the pad, so click on that, and the slope that we're going to use is -8. So key that in and hit enter to lock in that slope. So up is positive, down is negative. Point selection, we're going to use all. So I can hit my down arrow and select all. Left click to accept. Profile adjustment is going to be none. Left click through that. Vertical offset is 0. Left click, and it creates that profile for the yard. Now you can check your 3D model and notice, again, it doesn't create that until you have an active profile. Some tools you use will create the vertical geometry and set it active. This tool did not. So again, we need to set this yard profile active. One way to do this is to click on your horizontal geometry, go over to the element information, and you can expand that element, the yard element, and see what profile is under there. And you can right click from here, you can right click on the profile and set it active in the element info. So right click and set as active profile on that yard profile element, and as soon as it's set active, you can see it display in the 3D model. And we could open up the profile and see how that was created. It should have a profile as well. We don't have to do that. We're going to go ahead and we're going to create a terrain model from this pad and yard. So we're going to take those two elements and add them from graphics into a terrain. And a reason to do that would possibly be to see the contours, and then there may be some other reasons as well. So I'm going to go to my terrain model tools. Under terrain model, create from element. And I'm going to use quality control contours and give it a name of building pad. These are all going to come in as break lines. I just need to click on my elements to add them to the terrain. I'm going to left click on the building, followed by a left click on the yard, or pad and yard. Once I've got pad and yard selected, I can right click and go ahead and make sure my feature type is break line, left click to accept, edge method is none, left click, and it creates the terrain model. Right click when you're done to exit out of the tool, and verify that your contours are displayed. Now, because this is a terrain model, you can use terrain model tools. You can go over and analyze the terrain using analyze point or analyze between points, and you can see slopes. From here, we're going to create our tie slopes, or grade to the ground, with linear template. So we want to apply a template around this yard, around the outside here. So I'm going to go down to my 3D geometry tools and click on apply linear template. Don't really have to put anything in the dialog box. I think everything is going to pop up in my heads-up display. So the first thing we want to do is locate the element. So left click on the element, and then after we left click on our yard, it gives us the template, so we can hit Alt down on our keyboard and go and choose the correct template. So it should be underneath parking lot, building pad, edge treatment, simple tie slope. You can see a preview of it here. So you just highlight your template that you want, hit OK, and then left click to accept that template, and then choose your station. Where do you want to start and end? We're going to go ahead and start it at the beginning. So you can hold down the Alt key, tap the Alt key, lock it to the start, tap the Alt key, and when you hit the Alt key, it unlocks it, or if you hit the Alt key again, it can lock it to the end station. So left click to accept, and then we want to choose what side. Is it the inside or the outside? We want this to be on the outside, so I just left click anywhere on the outside of my yard, and it knows whether it should be reflected or not. And then we're going to type in an exterior corner sweep angle so that our template looks a little more smooth and has rounded edges. 5 degrees is a good value for this, so just type in 5 and hit enter and left click to accept, and it creates that linear template. Okay, and then I can right click or go back to my element selection to get away from that tool. And something that we could do optionally is we could change the elevation of the building pad and see how everything updates. So I could just go to the building pad profile. Down here, active profile is pad profile, and I can change the elevations and just see how everything updates. So it should interact accordingly. So if I set my vertical offset to 0 and hit enter, you can see how it updates. From that, it updates the yard profile, and that updates my linear templates around the edge of the yard. I could change it. Instead of maximum, I could do minimum. So I'd be using different slopes, cut or fill. Switch it back to maximum. You can see it in 3D, how it changes. And also switch this back to vertical offset of 2. Okay, so you can make changes and update one element, and the way that things are ruled. My geometry rules, it updates the other, and the linear template is assigned to that yard, so as that moves up and down, my side slopes will will change accordingly.